What if the most powerful man in the world was destroyed not by his enemies, but by a decision he made himself? History is filled with great conquerors, yet few have fallen as dramatically as Napoleon Bonaparte. At the height of his power, kings trembled at the mention of his name. He won battle after battle across Europe. His empire stretched farther than anyone had imagined possible. From a boy born on a small island, he became Emperor of France. Yet Napoleon was not born into great nobility. He came from Corsica, a small Mediterranean island. But his ambitions were larger than the world around him. The French Revolution opened a path to greatness, and his military genius shocked Europe. Victory after victory transformed his destiny, until he crowned himself emperor and stood at the peak of power. Almost no nation could stop him, except one stubborn enemy, Britain. Napoleon could not defeat Britain at sea, so he searched for another way. If he could not destroy Britain with cannons, he would destroy it through economics. Thus, the Continental System was born, a massive blockade designed to cripple British trade. But perfect plans rarely stay perfect. And the greatest problem emerged from Russia. Once Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I had been allies. They shook hands and promised peace. Yet their relationship slowly deteriorated. Russia began ignoring the blockade against Britain. To Napoleon, this was more than politics. It was an insult, and Napoleon never forgot an insult. In 1812, Napoleon made the biggest decision of his life. He would invade Russia, not with tens of thousands of soldiers, but with more than 600,000 men, the largest army Europe had ever seen. And it marched eastward. At first, everything seemed easy. Many believed the war would end within weeks. But Russia had a different strategy. They refused to fight directly. Instead, they kept retreating and destroyed everything behind them. The French found empty villages, burned supplies, and fewer resources with every mile. Yet Napoleon kept advancing. Every kilometer carried his army farther from home and deeper into danger. Then came the Battle of Borodino, one of the bloodiest battles in history. Cannons thundered across the battlefield. Thousands died in a single day. Napoleon claimed victory, but it was a costly one. Finally, the French reached Moscow, the city they had marched so far to capture. Yet something felt wrong. Moscow was nearly empty. Then the city burst into flames. Napoleon had captured Moscow, but may have already lost the war. Fire consumed the city Napoleon had fought so hard to take. Supplies were scarce. Yet Napoleon continued to wait, waiting for Russia to surrender. Days turned into weeks, but no answer ever came. Then winter arrived. At first, it was only a light snowfall. Then the temperatures kept falling, lower and lower. Many soldiers were unprepared for the Russian winter. Frost began claiming lives. Eventually, Napoleon gave the order to retreat. The long journey home began, and it became a nightmare. Hunger killed thousands. Horses collapsed and died. Cannons were abandoned in the snow. Russian forces began attacking relentlessly. Cossack cavalry harassed the retreating army. Every step became a struggle for survival. Victory no longer mattered. Survival was all that mattered. Yet even survival seemed impossible. Their greatest enemy was no longer Russia. It was the cold. It was starvation. It was exhaustion. The mighty Grande Armée was disappearing. The greatest army in Europe had become a shadow of itself. When the survivors finally emerged from Russia, they were barely recognizable. Out of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, only a fraction returned. The world began to realize something extraordinary. Napoleon could be defeated. His enemies wasted no time. New coalitions quickly formed against France. Armies marched from every direction. For the first time in years, Napoleon was fighting from a position of weakness. The empire he had built began to crack. Territory after territory slipped from his control. Then came another devastating blow. The Battle of Leipzig, one of the largest battles Europe had ever seen, and one of Napoleon's greatest defeats. The empire that once dominated Europe began to collapse. For the first time, Napoleon faced a reality he could not conquer. He was forced to abdicate. The Emperor of France lost his throne and was exiled to a small island called Elba. To many people, that should have been the end of the story. But Napoleon refused to surrender. He escaped, and thousands rallied behind him once again. For a brief moment, the legend returned. For 100 days, he reclaimed power. But history had one final chapter left to write. Waterloo was waiting, a battlefield that would decide his fate forever. This time, there would be no miraculous comeback. The conqueror of Europe was defeated once and for all. But here's the most surprising part of the story. Many people say Russia destroyed Napoleon. That is partly true, but it is not the whole story. His defeat began long before the first snowflake fell. It began the moment he stopped listening. The moment warnings were ignored. The moment victory convinced him that he could never be wrong. That is the most dangerous trap in history. Because great success often creates great blindness. The more a person wins, the easier it becomes to believe they are invincible. Napoleon was not destroyed by a single battle. He was destroyed by a decision born from absolute confidence. The greatest enemy of a conqueror is not always the army across the battlefield. Sometimes it is the voice inside his own mind. The voice that whispers, "You cannot fail." And history shows that the moment a leader truly believes that, the fall has already begun. Napoleon conquered much of Europe. But in the end, he could not conquer his own certainty.